Welcome to Resiliency Redefined. I'm your host, Robyne, and I am thrilled to share with you information about resiliency, well-being, performance, education, business, parenting, and everything in between. I'm committed to joining you each week to talk about these big ideas and bring them into action, habits, tools, strategies, tactics that allow us to finally uncover what it takes to truly be well. And I'm just so excited that you're here. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Resiliency Redefined. I'm your host, Robyne, and today I'm going to continue along the line of answering folks' questions. And today's question from a listener, I really resonated with this one, so I was happy to take some time to dive into it. The question was simple as this: how do we hold someone accountable? How do we hold someone accountable? Now, I appreciate this because I believe that holding people accountable, that is something that is extremely important for relationships, especially in the workplace, in terms of our personal and professional relationships, that we are people who say and do what we say we do and follow through. You might recall in last episode, I made the comment and shared the piece of research that the best way to improve your self-esteem, your sense of self-esteem, is to be a person who says what they're going to do. Be a person who has that followed through. Or, in light of what we're talking about today, a person who is accountable. Now, for us to take a deep dive into how do we hold someone else accountable, a starting place I think is important is actually how do we hold ourselves accountable? Because when we see how we hold ourselves accountable, these lessons and ideas I think will generalize really, really well to other, but it's a starting point to start at self. Now, when we think about accountability, we are doing what we say we're going to do. We follow through. We hold ourselves to a standard. The first idea I invite you to think about is that notion of your line. Now, it doesn't have to be a line in the sand. It could just be this line in terms of recognizing what behavior, what expectations you have for yourself, knowing what those lines are. And we talk about this often as our identity. And our identity is tied in with our values, our beliefs. Now, remember, your beliefs are just well-practiced thoughts. Okay, so they're things that we've really adapted to, we've really embraced. It is forming our line of our behaviors, our thoughts, our actions, all of it. And the question we often ask, and when we look at our behavior, when we're holding ourselves accountable, is this behavior or this action or what I'm about to say, is it above the line or is it below the line? Is it above the line in terms of, this is the expectation that I hold for myself? Or are you kind of engaging in some shadiness, something that perhaps is actually below the line? And you're operating below the line when it doesn't feel good, when you know that little part of you, your intuition knows that, oh, Jesus, that wasn't a good choice. That wasn't the right call. Or maybe you feel a wee bit disappointed in yourself that, I'm better than that. And saying something like, wow, I'm better than that. Now, again, I appreciate that's not very nice language to say to ourselves, but I think what it does do, again, is holding ourselves to a standard. So to be able to first establish what that line is, it's that piece around that self-awareness, knowing what I stand for, what I'm not okay with, understanding what is important and what is not important, being able to have those priorities of thoughts, of behaviors, again, and our actions. So I know, for example, raising 3 teenagers, we had a lot of conversations about what that line is. And I even recall, for example, when, sometimes the kids would say to me like, oh, well, this person's mom lets them do that. And I'm like, that's cool. People have their own, choices. They may have their own prerogative of what they might do in their house or with their family, but that doesn't fly in our house because we hold ourselves to this line. So again, using it as this frame of reference, but what's so important, especially when we're bringing other people into the conversation, is that we have clarity, that we all know that line, that standard that we hold ourselves to. Now, it doesn't mean we have to be perfect. Remember, practice makes better, right? So we want to make sure that we're operating a place that's keeping us in this level of being operators above the line. So that doesn't mean we have to get it perfect, but we don't negotiate with our values. We don't negotiate with that integrity piece or the character pieces that are extremely important to us. That's that line, and we hold firm. I also, in full disclosure, I do remember at one point saying to the kids when they told me, like, oh, this other person's mom lets them do this. And I do recall in a moment of maybe a wee bit of overwhelm saying, well, like, clearly I just love you more than that person's mom loves their kids. Probably not my best parenting move. My children will still remind me of the time they're like, do you remember when you tried to tell us like we weren't allowed to do those things? And you explained it by the fact that I simply loved you. Like I love them more than other people's parents love them. It was interesting learning moment for all of us. Okay, back on track. So holding ourselves accountable, we need that clarity. I am somebody who is a great way to get that statement out for you to help design and build that line for you. I am somebody who follows through. I am somebody who takes the stairs and not the elevator or the escalator when I can. I am somebody who makes a point of not interrupting somebody whenever is possible, right? I am somebody who will always take my garbage out of a car every single time I stop. Now, again, these might not be these deep character components, but they all are tied into character in the sense of I am somebody who wants to leave places better than when I found them, right? Or I'm somebody who cares deeply about basic courtesies and manners and just some of those kind of basics that sometimes it feels that get a little bit overlooked in 2025. Nevertheless, whatever comes after that statement, I am somebody who, it's going to give you an idea of what the behavior is above the line. So is this behavior above the line or below the line? Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to have days where we're feeling a wee bit off. So, for example, let's say I am somebody who goes for a walk every morning. I am somebody who consistently goes for a walk every morning. I hold myself accountable to that. Now, let's say you wake up one morning and you're not feeling great. Maybe you're feeling depleted. Maybe you're coming down with something. I know my Aura Ring gives me a wee bit of a heads up that, hey, there's something going on there. You might want to rest up. Your body temperature is changing, which is helpful, those little pre-warnings. Nevertheless, so let's say you woke up, you're not feeling great. Now, you might notice you're going to have what we call competing priorities. I am somebody who walks every morning, but I'm also someone who listens to my body and practices self-compassion. So again, it's brokering and negotiating where it makes sense to. We're not negotiating whether or not we are people who follow through. We're negotiating at times of recognizing where is our behavior? How does this fit with our goals? How do we make sure that we're, again, on track? And taking a rest day and acknowledging that, wow, I need some rest, to me, that behavior is still above board. Now, if I stayed up super late, like, I don't know, 4 a.m, reading some dragon fiction, doing my thing, and I wake in the morning and feel like, oh, I really don't want to go for that walk, because I know some of that behavior about staying up a wee bit too late wasn't ideal, I probably will still push myself to go for a walk. I might have a nap later in the day, maybe that 20-minute nap if I need energy, or the 90-minute nap if I need a heart rest. Nevertheless, I will still push myself because I know that that is a slippery slope. It is a slippery slope when we start to do habits that might not be serving us and then kind of justifying it or making some excuses. And when you're BSing yourself. That's what I let folks know all the time. And just recently, I was at a coaching session with an executive, and we talked about the fact that I'm like, when you are holding yourself accountable, and when you're making excuses. And we all have go-to excuses. Okay, there's no shame in that. There's no judgment. We all have them. And so I'd even invite you to think about, what is your go-to excuse that sometimes might be sabotaging your self-accountability? Maybe it's you don't have time. Maybe it's you're too tired. Or maybe it's a wee bit of self-entitlement where you're like, oh my gosh, I've done everything for everybody else. So you know what? I'm going to do whatever I want today, which means I'm going to, watch 8 episodes of a random new series. We Were Liars. Okay, whatever it might be. And then all of a sudden you realize, no, you're negotiating somewhere where you ought not to be. We're not holding ourselves accountable. So being really honest with yourself about your go-to excuses, knowing when you're going below the line and knowing when you're operating above the line. And when you operate above the line, you feel better. So in that example that I gave you, I stay up till 4 in the morning. I'm reading a book. I get up and I still go for a walk. When I'm going for the walk, it feels like this nice little reset. Now I had to push myself a little bit. I didn't really feel like it. The reality is we rarely feel like doing some of the big things that are going to help us feel better. But at the end of the day, being somebody who follows the line in terms of doing what I say I'm going to do, that actually matters. Okay, so that's this kind of idea about holding ourselves accountable. We have clarity, we make sure that we're being honest with ourselves. And again, there's a lot of comfort that comes when we start to be that person who I trust myself and building that sense of trust. Because even just for a moment, reflect on how many promises you've broken to yourself. How many times have you said you're going to go to bed early and then you stay up too late, or promise yourself that you're going to feed your body well, and then all of a sudden you haven't fed your body all day, you're underfed, and then you don't make the most wisest food choices at nighttime. Like, remember, a stressed out brain is not going to make good choices. That stressed, distressed brain that's not looked after, it's going to just go for those quick impulse grab and go things. It's not going to be patient enough to like wash and peel the carrots. That part is going to say, heck no. When that lizard brain takes the wheel, we don't make good choices. So be preventative when possible. Okay, I digress. Back on track. How do we hold other people accountable? Now, recently, I believe it was on the Diary of the CEO, Stephen's show. I believe that's where I heard it. But there was this one quote where it said, unexpressed expectations are premeditated resentments. Holy goodness. I'm going to say that again because it's so important. Unexpressed expectations are premeditated resentments. Unexpressed expectations are premeditated resentments. Since I heard that quote, I've noticed there's been this like odd little creep every once in a while where it almost is a wee bit of protest behavior in myself, I've noticed, where I just want people to know. And I don't want to necessarily have to tell them all the time, especially with my inner circle. Like, I just want them to know what to do. I don't want to have to tell them what to do. And I realize that's not fair. It reminds me of in a movie, I believe it was with Jennifer Aniston and Vince Vaughn. And it had something to do with buying lemons. And I can't even remember the context other than Jennifer Aniston said a line to Vince Vaughn where he's like, okay, I'll just get you the thing that you want. She's like, I want you to want to do it. And he's like, I don't want to do it, but I will do it because we're in a relationship. And she's like, no, I want you to want to do it. And I notice if I'm not careful, I can fall into that trap. I just want people to want to do it without having to tell them to do it. But when you circle it back to what is the end game, the end game for me is calm and peace and a wee bit of order. So that way there's enough spaciousness for fun and spontaneity, which feels like a wee bit of attention that I need to be structured enough that I feel safe, but have enough flexibility to feel spontaneous. So I feel engaged. Don't you worry. That's my problem. I navigate that tension, but it's nice to know it anyway. So when we're talking about this, though, with other people, realizing that wanting people to do something, but without clearly expressing that or being super clear on what that looks like, we're actually setting ourselves up for failure. We're setting ourselves up for more difficulty. So this being said, when we are holding other people accountable, first and foremost, we absolutely have to have clear expectations and we have to share them. We have to share them. Now, I can share with you, recently, I was working with a subcontractor who was doing a project with us, and he used this example, and my husband, Jeff, uses this all the time. I don't even know, and I even asked, we don't know where like Jeff first heard it, and I even asked the contractor, I'm like, hey, where did you hear that from? We're trying to figure out the origins of that concept. He didn't know either. He says just everybody talks about this in carpentry. But the idea is when you're doing a project, okay, you get to pick two of the three. It's going to be cost effective. So cost, fast, or quality. So you're going to have it fast, you're going to have a good price, or you're going to have quality. But you can only ever have two of the three. So you can't have something quickly, great quality at a low cost. You either have to forfeit cost and it might be quick and it might be the quality will be there, right? If you don't care about how much it costs. Or maybe if you are really conscientious in terms of like, okay, I don't need this on a very tight timeline, then you can have it more cost effective with really high quality, right? So if you want something just fast and cheap, it's probably not going to be good quality. I hope that makes sense. So it's this triangle, right? So you can have it quick, fast, or cheap. Those are not the right ones. Fast, good quality, or cost effective. When we're talking to this tradesman, right, he tells me this. He's like, okay, which one are you going for? And in this particular case, I was like, you know what? I'm going to go for timing and quality because I just need to get this done. I knew that was going to hit the cost. It's going to be a little bit more expensive, but I just wanted to get it done. Now, what ended up happening in this encounter was they weren't able to do it on time, like substantively longer than they were supposed to. And I was so frustrated because we had talked about the fact. We did express the expectation that we were willing to pay more for this project because we just wanted it done. So that made me very frustrated when all of a sudden that third variable, the third player in that, didn't follow through. Now, I have shared in earlier episodes, struggle with difficult conversations sometimes. However, something that I know is that if I didn't say something, that I was going to be really resentful towards this project. And again, when we're having a difficult conversation, no small talk, just get to the matter. And I want to be able to hold people accountable in this case because, hey, dude, you said this is the way you were going to do it, and now you're not doing it. At the absolute end of the day, even if I crafted the most perfect sentence and I rehearsed the most amazing narrative to be able to share with them, at the end of the day, we cannot change somebody else's behavior. We physically, emotionally, psychologically cannot technically hold somebody accountable. What we might do is introduce a consequence that doesn't actually hold someone accountable. What that does is create a consequence when the expectation is not met. You can't change someone's behavior, right? The old adage, you can, take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, or however that goes. You absolutely cannot change somebody else's behavior. So when we're holding somebody else accountable, the reality is we can't in the way that we would like to think we can, but we can introduce consequences. So once we have a clear expectation of what we're looking for, then we can, if it's not met, we can introduce a consequence. And that consequence is something that I would suggest needs to make sense with what's going on. It needs to be what we talk about, a natural consequence, in terms of it has to be relevant to the situation at hand. The other piece to bring to your ideas around this is when we're communicating with someone, we have a tendency of putting way too much information in one sentence. And we also have a tendency of making it really personal. So my invitation when you are trying to let somebody know the experience, what the impact for you was, or whatever it might be, is we want to be really specific and we want to give just a solid example, not throw in the kitchen sink. So what I mean by that is if you are going to have a difficult conversation and you're, again, trying to hold someone accountable, my invitation is to keep it very short, be very clear, and make it about the behavior or the action. We want to make sure that we're not making it about the person, right? Something like, oh, you're not trustworthy or you're not reliable, versus my understanding that this was going to be done by Friday. Help me understand how we didn't meet that goal, or what does it look like at this point in terms of what's our next step. Now, I remember when I was teaching at the university, one of the things that I tried really hard to do with my students is to give them all of their assignments like at the beginning of the semester. Now, I would tell them you might not have all of the information to be able to answer these assignments, but I wanted them to know right at the beginning of the course these are my expectations. These are the things that I'm going to be asking for you. And then what I would try to do was build in checkpoints along the way. So that way we were on track. So, for example, if it was a large research paper, I'd make sure that we would have an outline. So they would get the outline in, I'd be able to provide them some feedback, and then we would have even perhaps their first paragraph, right? I would do something so that way they've had to get started. And then when, let's say, the due date comes up and they aren't finished, I would always ask them, most of the time I'd ask them, submit to me the work that you've done to this point. Show me what you've done to this point. So again, I set the expectations that if you're going to ask for an extension, which is okay because life totally happens and I get it, be prepared that I am going to ask you to submit to me the work you have done up until the point then there was the interrupt, or there was the crisis, or there was the problem. So I had very, very clear expectations with my students that, yeah, I will give you lots of latitude, but you have to work with me on this process. And I can share with you, so many of my students said to me, the fact that they had to show how much work they had done up to the point where whatever happened, where they thought they needed the extension, so many of my students said like I was going to ask for an extension but then realized like no, it's okay, I can get this done, or realizing like knowing that we talked about it, knowing that this isn't a place where they could kind of cut corners. So again, expectations is important, but also creating systems that allow people to be successful most of the time, right? We're not going to be able to create a system that works for everybody and it's perfect and flawless. That's not the point. We want systems that work most of the time. Because you know what? If it works most of the time, I'm okay with that, right? I'm okay with a solid B plus in most areas. Just a quick little digression. Just recently, I make decisions very quickly. And Jeff and I had a conversation. He's like, wow, he's like, you make decisions so fast. And I said, yeah. And you know what? Because it works 90% of the time, it's a system that I'm okay to keep using. Now, if I make decisions really fast and like 90% of the time I was making the wrong choice, then I would pause and revisit a system. Anything that is working 75% and above, I'll take it. That works for me. That's a strategy that I find works well as somebody who makes quick decisions. Okay. I hope that was useful. I hope that was helpful. That piece around our self accountability, our piece about, again, we can't really hold other people accountable. The reality is we introduce consequences at that point. And perhaps the consequence in the example I gave you about the builders, I just won't work with them again, right? So it doesn't necessarily be a consequence in the exact moment, but it's related. Again, just the gentle reminder as well, the reason why we start with self accountability is we know it feels really good when we're living aligned. When we live and we behave and we show up in alignment with our values, it feels really, really good. We also know that it builds that discipline. And as Jocko Willink says, discipline equals freedom, right? When we are so locked in our systems and things are working really well most of the time, it gives us so much freedom to do other things. We know it increases our sense of self-trust. Being able to trust ourselves is extremely important, especially when the world feels so untrustworthy right now and so uncertain. We also know it actually reduces some procrastination and some decision making. And we've talked about this before, right? When we're really going through it, we got to simplify. And when we just have simple yes, no's, this or that, it's a lot easier than these massive charcuterie boards of choice. When you're distressed, a charcuterie board of choice is not what we want. We want this or that, not what would you like. And the last one is also improves our relationships with others and selves when we're persons that consistently operate above the line. And again, whatever that line looks like for you, you are entitled to your line, however your line makes sense for you. And just knowing you set that standard, you hold yourself accountable. And remember, like attracts like. So when you start holding yourself accountable and you operate above that line, you're going to start to find other people who share that space with you. And it just becomes this, like, there's just this ease to it. You start being around the right people. And again, there's going to be some folks that operate below the line. They're still in our sphere, but we might just want to maybe just love a little bit from afar, right? Maybe just putting a wee bit of spaciousness and recognizing, hey, that might be okay for them to do, but for me, this is important. This is important that I show up in my integrity, holding ourselves accountable. It makes a big difference. Okay, my friends, I hope that was helpful. Thanks for tuning in. Please keep asking me your questions. I'm not an expert on all these things by any means, but I do appreciate human behavior, and I do have a few ideas that I do love to share. So thanks for asking. Take good care, and I'll connect with you next time. Bye for now. Thank you for spending time with this podcast episode today. I hope you found something helpful in Resiliency Redefined. Please feel free to share it with somebody who you might think could benefit. Maybe there was something useful, something in particular that you think you could pay forward. Also, if you have a moment, please feel free to rate and review this podcast wherever you like to listen to your podcast. It means the world to me. And again, thanks for your time. Thank you for your interest. Take good care, and I'll see you next time.